For centuries, the frustration of the young voices would reverberate in the footsteps of young men running away from police vans. I can remember when I was growing up at about the age of 11, 10, 12 in South Africa, back when there was still, before apartheid ended. One of the ways that I knew that something was going on was in the evening, almost somewhere around the 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, I would hear the footsteps tapping on the road in unison. And then there'll be the voices of the young people singing, "Hi, hi, hi." And then I knew that something was going on, and I knew, even though it was going to get me in trouble as a young person at that age with my grandfather, I just could not resist that tap, that innocent, rhythmic tap of frustrated young voices fighting for freedom. And in the most recent history in South Africa, another generation, much younger than I am now, of unheard voices, the frustrations of their minds and of their young energy was expressed violently on what is now termed as the worst riots since democratic South Africa. The latest tally of the cost of those riots was 22 million rands, rendering the South African Risk Association almost technically insolvent. And in 2020, the frustration of the idle young energy of the young Americans that accounted for the lion's share of the $22 billion riot damage. This was after George Floyd was brutally killed after a tussle with the US police. Over and over again throughout history, the unheard young voices would be felt through violent outbursts of frustration. Frustration is often a reflection of a struggle to find an ear willing to hear you as a human being. And often for a young person whose voice is constantly ignored, this frustration would normally manifest itself out in a violent manner. And still, it seems that humanity is hard of learning, ignoring young voices. And ignoring young voices is violence against humanity as a whole, not just for the youth themselves. In townships, in ghettos, in compounds, in informal settlements, in slums throughout the world, opportunists lie in wait for the frustrated, unheard, idle young energy with limitless potential. The gang leaders aim their recruitment at them in these places. The terrorists, online, extreme militants, they develop complex strategies of targeting these young people. Mischievous community leaders take advantage of their empty hands held out in helplessness. Yet it seems that our leaders are still hard of learning. They're still hard of hearing the voices of the young people. To ignore the voice of young people is violence against humanity. Because it is humanity in the end that pays that dear price of crime, of teenage pregnancies, drug and addiction, prostitution, young girls being ravaged on the altars of old perverts who promise them financial support at the expense of their innocence and their purity. To ignore the price of young people is violent crime against humanity. Our leadership structures have to account at some point for their apathy, for their indifference, for their disgusting disdain for the plight of the young people. To keep on ignoring young people's voices is to become deaf to the future. It is like to turn a blind eye, let me put it this way, to turn a blind eye to their desperation is to lead us all into a dark future. In the end, an ignored young youth becomes that adult that is seeking for attention. An undermined young person becomes that adult looking for significance and acceptance by any means necessary. A young person's ignored voice becomes eventually that screaming, rude adult voice looking for attention. A young person not listened to, they yearn to be heard. And at some point, they learn also to ignore voices of reason that come from the supposed wisdom of the adults. To ignore young voices is to teach those young people that being an adult is to ignore the young voice. We need to do better as leaders. In all structures of society in the world, it would behoove us, it would benefit us to give an ear and attend to the cries of our young people so that we can stop the cycle. At some point in our adulthood, we need to realize that nothing changes unless we do. And we need to garner the strength to change what needs to change. And what needs to change is the cycle of ignoring young voices. Because that is how we will stop the violence that so plagues humanity at the ends of the idle intellectual energy with limitless potential. To ignore young voices is to perpetuate violence against humanity. We need to harness that inquisition, the curiosity, the exploring minds, the inquiring minds that seek to learn and to understand what makes the status quo work or what makes the status quo fail. This has created an impasse, I believe, a lot of times in progression towards peace. Peace in our society and peace in the world. Because that brewing storm of frustration somehow is going to play itself out in adulthood. We need to continue to borrow from the energy and lack of experience, undeterred by our own hard life experiences. We need to remember that it was the very young naivety that propelled us into venturing further into the jungle of life. And many of us came out as warriors on the other side. To listen to young voices is to maintain peace. It is to carve our way into progress. Everyone who listens is able to reason, or at least able to hear the reason behind the crying voice. And everyone who is listened to finds peace. The question is this: how much of the violence that is in the world can be ascribed to centuries, if not millennia, of ignoring young voices as they question some of the adult decisions, some of our leadership decisions, some of the decisions by those who hold influence because of their age, because of their tenure? Is peace possible without tending to the voices of the young people, of the youth? I don't know what the answers are to some of these questions that I have put on the table today, but I believe that we need to keep asking these questions until we find the right answer. I believe again, to ignore the voices of the young is to set up our society for a frustrated adult who thinks that among other virtues, ignoring young voices is what makes them an adult. That's my thoughts.